thank you so much for bringing us here again, and thank you for the summer and what you've been teaching us through each week that we come here. And I pray once again that you would speak to us, that you would open our hearts, and that you would speak through us through the subject of sex and how you want to increase that or change our perspective of it in our marriages. And I pray that we would honor you with our marriages, even through physical oneness. And I thank you for each person here, and I pray your blessings over them. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, does everyone have the note sheet? Just making sure. If you don't, it's in the back table over there, so you might want to get one. And then hopefully you got a pen as well. You have an outline there. We're going to just jump into the topic. But before we do, let me review a couple things. Some of you missed a couple weeks, which is totally fine. We've been posting it, by the way, on Facebook, on our group. So if you missed any week and you want to watch it, it's not like high quality video, but it's enough to get you the content. But you're welcome to go search the Oneness Experience, and hopefully you already got a link on that as well. And then just to review, we're going through 7 commitments that we make as couples that lead to a life-giving marriage. And we're on number 5 today. And part of those commitments, we're unfolding what we call the 4 dimensions of oneness. So like there's a relational, emotional, physical, and spiritual component to our relationships, and they all add to one another. So when you have one, it helps all the rest connect, and when you disconnect one, it makes all the rest disconnect. So we're working on all of them in a holistic way, which is really important to understand in light of tonight, because sometimes when people talk about physical intimacy, it's kind of separated from the rest of the intimacies, but we all know they go together pretty well. And if you don't have the rest of the intimacies, often you don't have the physical one either. And so we have to look at this holistically as we go about it. And then let's review the commitments together for just a second. So the first one, we call it honor marriage. Can we say that together, the phrase that we say for this? Our oneness will be the priority of our family. And can like one person just say like a 2-sentence version of what we talked about that evening? Anyone want to volunteer for that? I know it's a huge group. Go ahead. Yeah, so marriage is the center of the home, and we ought to teach even our kids and people around us that marriage is the priority that God asks us to prioritize. And it doesn't mean we don't prioritize kids, because obviously we do, and we love kids. But the best gift we can give our kids is a healthy marriage. All right, commitment number 2. We talked about the 4 loves. Anyone remember what the 4 loves were? And you're willing? Go for it. I saw you nod. Can you remember? Yes. Agape. Agape, eros, what else? Phileo, and it's the hardest one, is the one nobody knows. What's that? He already said that. The what? High five. Storage. Yeah, I don't know the right way to pronounce that, but the storage was the common one, and eros was the one you control, and phileo is the one you cultivate, and agape is the one that you remember? Choose. And it's a choice. So we would choose and cultivate love in our marriage. All right, commitment number 3, relational oneness. Let's say it together. We will fight to be each other's best friend. And this is the one that we talked about. Wait, is that in the right order? It is, right?
Yeah.
We did do that, okay. So that's the one we talked about, how to build that relational intimacy with one another. And then we talked about emotional oneness. Let's say that together. We will share emotional intimacy primarily with each other, not with others. And that was pretty basic as well. And then tonight we're talking about physical oneness. So you might want to write this down. It's already written for you, but write it again. And it goes like this. We will live in such a way that leads to consistent sexual intimacy. Now, it's really good to preface this with the understanding that what I just mentioned, that physical intimacy is connected to all the other intimacies. So what we're going to do is we're going to just go through like 7 or 8 truths or principles that help us understand and increase our perspective and the health of our physical oneness. And all of these are just foundational truths. And then as you kind of go through it, if there's one that like stands out more to you, you're like, hey, we should pay attention to this. It'd be good to just jot it down, take some notes, and then have some time to chat about it later on as well. So you want to kick it off, babe?
Sure.
Okay.
So the first one is, okay, physical intimacy is not just sexual. Now there's also non-sexual physical intimacy, such as hand-holding, cuddling, or a hug. And sometimes sometimes non-sexual physical intimacy can lead to sexual intimacy, but it doesn't always have to. And many times, this is where men and women can clash, because men can sometimes assume that because women want to be physically close, that that's an automatic sign that they want to be sexually close, but it doesn't always mean that's the case.
I am guilty of this. So like, if she goes like this, I'm like, oh, really? You're thinking about that? I'm just being honest. There is, the funny thing about the topic is that there are some like norms with men and women that we like differ in, and then there's like the couple that violates all the norms. And it's totally okay. And sometimes you're like, in fact, as we talk about this, sometimes we'll say like, sometimes typically women think like this, and we're not being like sexist or anything. It's just like there's some norms that we are kind of built with. But if you don't fit that category, don't feel like you have to make yourself fit, because it's totally okay. There are some women that if the guy looks at them funny, they're like, I won't, you know. So I haven't met those yet, but they're out there. All right. So all the types of intimacy, this is the one that men often say they long for the most. And it's, again, it's just the way that it is. So there's some studies on this. When men were asked to rank how close they feel to their spouse, they typically feel the most connected when physical intimacy is present. And to them, that means sex. To women, it's not always the same. If you ask them, when do you feel closest to your husband, their answer is not often when we're having sex. So it's kind of, some basic differences with men and women. All right, so number 2 is this. Sex can be a litmus test. And it's good to understand this. So couples who are angry with one another will eat together, go to the movies together, go to church together, but most likely are not going to be having sex together. Does that make sense? So you have a lot of these, it's a gauge at times for how we're doing in other dimensions of our relationship. And it's not a rule, but oftentimes, if a couple is lacking in physical intimacy, it's because it's an indicator. Like maybe there's other things to pay attention to. And here's where men and women can be a little bit different at times. The men might just see it as a physical thing, complaining, we don't do it enough. And to the woman, there's something else happening. So this is why it's important to say, okay, it's just telling us there's something wrong. It's not telling us that we're just physically wrong. Does that make sense? There's something else happening behind the scenes, and it's a good indicator. So if a married couple finds themselves going through weeks without sex, it's probably a good time to just say, is my spouse okay? Am I okay? Are we okay? Are we meeting each other's needs? How are things going? It's just a good way to kind of evaluate how things are. All right, number 3.
So number 3, sex can build unity and intimacy in marriage.
Yeah, so 1 Corinthians says this. Let me just unpack this a little bit. In chapter 6, verse 16. So do you not know that when a person unites himself with a prostitute, one with her in his body? For it is said that two become one flesh. In other words, this is why I put that on there. There is a clear indication in Scripture that sex is connected to intimacy. And in fact, it's connected to oneness. And that oneness is meant to be expressed in the context of our marriage. And so part of us building toward oneness in our marriages is us figuring out how to be physically intimate in a way that serves one another. So you cannot separate our spiritual journey even with as a couple from our physical journey as a couple. They're interconnected because God created it, and it's just a way for us to build toward intimacy with one another. So just very basic on that. And then you see also that the sexual act was meant to be a symbol of unity in marriage. And when couples cultivate that intimacy, you're actually displaying something to the world. And we talked about this a lot in terms of marriage. that marriage is a way that God wants to show the world His desire toward humans. And so the closer we are in marriage, the more it reveals to the world how God desires to be with us. The other component of this, in Ezekiel 16:8, let me just read you this verse. He's speaking of, God is using sex as an illustration of the kind of intimacy He wants to have with the people of Israel. So He says, later I passed by, and when I looked at you and saw that you were old enough for love, I spread the corner of my garment over you and covered your nakedness. I gave you my solemn oath and entered into a covenant with you, declares the Lord, and you became mine. And speaking of getting married and being sexually active, and He says, God took Israel as His wife, as a husband took his virgin wife to himself. And He meant sex in marriage to symbolize the most intimate relationship that we can have, the intimate relationship that God wants to have with the world. So there's something that it speaks of, and I just think it's good to know this, because sometimes sex is connected to guilt in our minds, and it's connected to like impurity and connected to immorality, but really it's created to be something holy. And sometimes it's hard for us to see it, but even God Himself used it to be able to teach people what He desires to have in terms of intimacy with human beings. And then a side note on this one, in terms of men and women typically want to feel connected emotionally before having sex, and men want to have sex in order to feel connected emotionally. Does that make sense? So it's good for us to identify as we go through this. There's some like differences. It's like one side of the book versus the other cover of the book, but it's the same book. And if I'm feeling like I want to be close to her, I'm thinking, oh, let's have sex so we can be close. And she's thinking, well, I don't feel close enough to you to have sex with you right now. And that tension is actually really healthy, and it creates, it helps us ask questions and figure out how to know each other and serve one another.
Mm-hmm. So the next one is, it's probably one of my favorites here. Sex was designed by God to bring pleasure. And I'll tell you why it's one of my favorites, because like he mentioned, depending on how you grew up, if you grew up in church or maybe even another religion, however you grew up, I want you to think about your perspective of sex as a child or before you got married. Often it is a negative thing, it's a bad thing, it's a guilt thing. And so think about it with me. If you grow up your whole life hearing or learning, sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad, on your wedding night, say you did make it the whole way and you were a virgin all the way until your wedding night, you're not going to change in one moment for the most part. All of a sudden sex is good, and you're going to undo 25 years or 30 years of being told sex is bad, sex is bad, sex is bad. That's going to be a hard thing for you to overcome, and it's not going to happen usually the first night or the first week. It's going to take months and years of you undoing that message that sex is bad. And so even for me, with our kids, I'm careful not to say sex is bad, sex is bad. No, sex in and of itself isn't bad. It's how you handle it, right? Like fire. Fire is bad in the wrong place. Fire is good in the right place. And so if we even learn for ourselves to tell ourselves that sex is designed by God, it can't be bad, but how are we using it? How is it in our life? If you have it in the wrong way, yes, it will destroy your life. But if it is done in a godly way, in the way He designed it, then it's meant to be a really good thing. And so that's important for us as adults to understand, and even to reframe our thinking and how we think about it, because how we think about it, we're going to send the same message to our kids, and in turn, they're going to have the same struggle when they get married too.
I have a question for you guys, out of curiosity. If you grew up and most of what was taught to you was in the language, I'm wondering which one was you, okay? If the language of sexual activity towards you, like whether it's from parents or church or school, was more on the avoid, 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 be careful, be careful, be careful, it can be bad, it can ruin your life, or was more on, no, this is a gift and there's a beautiful side to it and there's a holy side to it, and you know, I'm wondering which one was A for you, like the first one I mentioned. Oh my gosh. Anyone had number two? 3, 4. Okay. So this is really important, guys. In fact, this is like unfortunate. I hate even saying this, but unfortunately, I think a lot of churches have made a mistake in this, in even how we approach it with students, and that one of the things that we try to scare sexual immorality out of kids instead of painting a beautiful picture of what it could be. And it's really important as parents, for those of you that are parents, to keep this in mind. It's very tempting for us to scare holiness into our kids. Like, avoid, you're gonna get, sick, you're gonna get pregnant, and so you gotta grow up with a sense of guilt and feeling like, oh my gosh, like this is like, and so you hide it, and it's in the darkness, and you don't know how to talk about it in your home. Instead, I think a better approach is to build it up as a beautiful thing in the context of marriage, and say, man, God designed us to be a great way of expressing intimacy once you're married, and to be able to get to know Him more, and build that language of freedom from the very beginning in the home. And it's good to ask yourself, remember a couple sessions ago we said, you will unintentionally become like your parents unless you intentionally try not to. This is another way of that. We will unintentionally have the same tone in our home, like 98% of us did, unless we build it differently. And this is part of why we're talking about this tonight. Sexual intimacy is very beautiful, and it's an expression of who God is, and it reveals Him to the world. And so in our homes, we ought to be able to talk about it in light of holiness. It's even some practical things on this, okay? We have 5 kids, and there's a line with the topic of sex with kids, obviously. But we are not super hidden about the conversation with them. So we talked about this before, like, our kids are all growing up, so we have 14-year-old, 13, 12, 10, and 8. Did I get that right? Yes. So our older ones, they already in school, they already have, all their friends already talk about it. It's crazy to me. And so they're getting all of that there. But in our home, we want them to know, like, hey, we can talk about this. And so they know, like, hey, when we put them to bed early because daddy and mom have couch time together, and we lock our door at night because we have sexual intimacy together. They don't know what that means entirely. They're not like, we don't want to spark curiosity too early, but you want to make it like a part of, like, this is not something that is hidden because it's in darkness because it's sinful. It's something that God created us to enjoy. So be very cautious not to build that mindset inside of the kids' minds, that it has to be all like in this hidden part of life, because if you do, they're gonna start now treating it as a hidden part of their life. So somewhere it needs to be open, and the place of safety for it to be open is the home. I have a real random comment on, I don't even know if I should share this, but I'm just gonna go for it. There is a part of this, I probably should have processed it a little bit more before I went down this road. Okay, so when it comes to, how many are parents, real quick? Just so there's enough for you, so I think I'm just gonna say it. So, sometimes with kids, there's a curiosity with nakedness that they will have instantly, because as they're growing up, they see people dress kind of funny, and they're like, start picturing stuff. They'll have a commercial where someone's boobs pop up, their cleavage, and they'll have, they'll be in school and whatever it is. Like, there will be many opportunities that'll make them curious about nakedness. And sometimes in people's homes, even in Christian homes, people are so reserved with that part of their life that it feels like a taboo subject so badly growing up, that anytime a kid thinks of some kind of, like, if I'm even wondering, what does a penis look like? I hope there's no student around here. Or what does whatever look like? They're all thinking, oh, I need to look at pornography to figure that out. And there is a holy way for this to happen, and you have to discern. It's not like a black and white, but I think you have to be really cautious with this, in the sense that, like, the place where their curiosity ought to be neutralized is the home. And I'm not saying you need to walk around naked in your home. Probably shouldn't even be recording this. I might chop it off later. But it has to be, so like in our kids, as they grew up, like sometimes I've walked around with my boxers on.
This is when they were really young.
When they were really young.
Not with our 12-year-old.
No, but there's like a part of their curiosity that the home is the safe place to figure out how to take it out of their minds, the curiosity, and find good natural ways to do that you laugh about it. Because you don't want them to go in darkness to figure that out. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to throw that out there, and we chat about it on our staff. I had a long conversation with Pastor David about this. He's got 2 little girls and a little boy, and we were all kind of discerning, okay, what's the right time? Because they start asking questions. You know, these little girls, Daddy, why does little, have a thing there? And so, like, even with the siblings, like, there's natural ways for that conversation to happen, and I just think parents should figure out how to make it natural in the home. Just throw it out there.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I also think, just because we're on this subject,
Yeah.
completely different thing than he said, but how awesome could it be as the church as a whole, if we became a community of people, or if the church at large was known for having such healthy marriages or happy marriages, that those were the couples who were known for having the best sex lives. I think the world thinks of the church and they don't think that they're enjoying sex. There's a big misconception there, and I think we've done that to ourselves, and maybe just the way I've grown up with the sex is bad message, we've kind of done that to ourselves. But how would it be as a church to have that testimony or have that example of, no, we have great marriages and we are the ones who are most fulfilled in our marriages? And I think there is a stat on that about couples who pray together, right?
Yes, and there's several stats. One of my favorites. Check this out. Some of you are going to want to be in ministry after this. There was a study a while back that I don't remember exactly. I need to go find it now. They studied, I think, 100 different professions. And the profession on number 2 on the list, the people that had the most fulfilling sexual life were pastors. That's why I joined the ministry. Just kidding. But the stat is true. But there is a connection. Your spiritual couples that pray together and have a vibrant spiritual journey, life together, are more sexually active than couples that don't. But again, this is generally speaking. There's a lot of factors that go into that. But I agree with Mandy, and I think part of our goal as a church is to build that culture where we talk about it as a beautiful thing, and we build it up as, man, I want my kids to be so excited about sex with their spouses, and full sex, not little sex. Not like lustful sex and non-covenantal sex, but like full, where you're spiritually one, emotionally one, relationally one. God is present and the Holy Spirit is empowering you in your sex. And I want them to long for that and to get so excited that's what will drive their purity, not fear. And that's where we shift our mindset as believers. So here's a couple things in light of this. I just think there's so many funny verses on sex in the scriptures, and I figured might as well throw it out there. And I think you're getting this from this, but our talk tonight is very raw. We're not like very polished in it. We're just kind of sharing thoughts, and some of it you might not like. Just throw it out, but keep the stuff you like. Proverbs 5:18, it says this: "May your fountain be blessed." Figure out what that means. "And may you rejoice in the wife of your youth, a loving doe, a graceful deer. May her breast satisfy you always. May you ever be captivated by her love." I just like this because the scriptures talk about enjoying it. Like, it's a pleasurable thing. God created it. And then Song of Solomon is really fun to read as a couple, by the way. And you just take turns reading it to each other. And it's fun. You just laugh the whole time. How beautiful you are, and how pleasing, O love, with your delights. Your stature is like that of the palm, and your breasts like the clusters of fruit. I think the students would laugh a lot. I said, "I will climb the palm tree, and I will take hold of its fruit." May your breasts be like the clusters of the vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth be like the best wine. May the wine go straight to my lover, flowing gently over lips and teeth. It sounds like 50 Shades of something. I belong to my lover, and his desires is for me. Come, my lover, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages. Let us go early in the vineyards to see if the vines have budded. figure out that symbol, what that means. If their blossoms have opened, and if the pomegranates are in bloom, there I will give you my love. Some romance right there. Straight up from the Word. Song of Solomon, chapter 7. Couples are meant to enjoy their spouse through sex in a very real way. Sex is celebration of that relationship, and it's an expression of pleasure to one another. Amen? All right, so hey, the last couple ones are all from one text. If you have a Bible or the Bible app, you might want, actually I printed it for you, didn't I? Did I print 1 Corinthians for you? Okay, so I'm going to read that, and then we're going to unfold some principles that come out of this. I'm really excited about this because there's some fresh stuff in there. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says, now for the matters that you wrote about, and Paul's responding to questions they asked, and there's a little bit of a weird stuff here, but I'll explain. He says, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. All right, go home. All right. So, but since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband, and in the same way, the husbands do not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. There's a lot of stuff in here. We just want to give you like 3 things pulling out of it, okay? Do you want to open it up?
Sure. Okay. So sex is a means by which couples protect each other from temptation. So that verse there, 1 Corinthians 7:1. Paul taught that marriage and sex in marriage was meant to protect couples from temptation towards sexual immorality. So it's a way of not lusting over other women or other men out there. It keeps your unity one in the home.
And then there's, if you guys remember the temptation circle we did on the table before? And the reverse thing that happens before marriage. So before you're married, you're here, and can you stand with me for just a second? Before you're married, magnetic field wants us to go like this. And then after you're married, the magnetic field keeps pulling you apart, and you have to fight for that. And when it pulls you apart, it's because it's pulling you toward other people often. And part of the idea with this is that God created, because the marriage is a covenant that's meant to be forever. Part of us protecting that covenant is us knowing that our sexual activity will help each other not go outside of that circle and stay close. And so it's just really important to understand that it's a way to protect each other from temptation. And when we decide not to, Paul actually warned us to be really careful if you're not. In fact, he said, if you're not, let it be because you just want to be spiritual. like if you're going to be praying so much, like you're going to be so devoted to prayer that you can't even be physically. I've never been at that level of prayer. Like I've prayed a lot, but I still wanted to have sex. And like if you're gonna be so devoted that you don't want to have time for anything else in your life, fine, do that. And I think he did that on purpose, by the way. He's like, in case people are trying to be spiritual, like, oh, I don't know. He said, okay, if you're gonna be like, if you're one excuse only, if you're gonna devote yourself so deeply to prayer, and some translations say fasting. So maybe it's because you're kind of weak and you're fasting for 40 days, then that's fine. Don't have sex. Otherwise, protect yourself from being tempted is what he's saying. Be smart. All right, next one. Sex is a way of serving your spouse. So he said this, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. He taught that we basically don't have owner. When you get married, your body belongs to one another. And a part of us serving one another is to really be aware of each other's needs and learn how to serve each other sexually. And so we have to learn to, it's important for us to understand that sexual intimacy, in a way, is like ministering to one another as a couple. So you are learning literally to say, I'm going to humble myself to serve you, which means there are times that it's important to strive toward that kind of intimacy, even if your emotions are not fully telling you to do it. But we're going to talk about what this means, because we're not talking about like, you cannot use this against your spouse, right? Hey, the scripture says you cannot withhold it from me, so therefore, come on. Like, you, man, if you do that, and you quote us on that, we will ourselves come knock on your door. Actually, that'd be weird. But that's just, I hope the Lord rebukes you if you ever use that.
It's for yourself.
It's a way for you to say, hey, you can't use it as a weapon, right, to punish your mate. You can't say, I'm going to withhold to punish you, or I'm going to try to, like, hey, you need to do this for me. It's just a way of saying, I'm going to serve you in this. And we are going to be committed to meeting each other's needs, not meeting our own lust. Does that make sense? There's a big difference between serving your spouse in sex or serving your lust in sex. When you're serving your lust, it's about you. When you're serving your spouse, it's about them. And a lot of couples don't have great physical intimacy because they have been trying to have it to fulfill their own needs, not to serve their spouse. And there's a huge, huge difference with that. Okay. Philippians 2. You want to read that verse for us, babe? I think here at the top.
Yes. Okay. It says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look out not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others.
So the goal here, as a husband, is to think, how can I bring the most pleasure to my wife? And as a wife, you're thinking, how can I bring the most pleasure to my husband? And if we're both trying to do that, both get fulfilled. If one of them says, how can I bring the most pleasure to me, it already breaks that flow. So it's really important to have the right mindset in regards to this. All right, and I'm really excited about the last one. Can we jump into that one? So far, let's review for just a second, okay? So a physical intimacy is not just sexual. Sex can be a litmus test. Sex builds unity and intimacy in marriage. Sex was designed by God to bring pleasure. Sex is a means by which a couple protects each other from temptation. It's a way of serving our spouse. And then lastly, it's a matter of... Did you just hear the topic and you want to get a... Hey, I think you unplugged my mic, bro.
Hello. What you guys are doing?
You thought I had something funny going on, huh?
Some surprises. Hello.
Test.
Hello.
That would have been really funny. I'm not creative enough. There are some people that are like naturally funny. I'm not one of those. And
Hello.
there you go. I wish I knew how to like leverage those moments and create something funny out of it. You should have just done it, Harvey. All right, so physical oneness is a matter of self-control. Okay, that's the last one. And let me explain what this means. This is like I was actually in my devotional time like 2 months ago. I was reading through this text, and I just felt this word pop up at me. And let me read to you that verse one more time. It says, "Come after you've been apart." He's saying if you're gonna pray and not be physically intimate. It says that when you come together again, then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, this is really interesting. I was processing this. Oftentimes when you hear about self-control, it's about avoiding sex. That makes sense? So it's like your self-control is like trying to not do stupid stuff with sexual morality. And here, he's literally saying, you gotta come together. Like, be self-controlled to come together, or Satan's gonna tempt you. So let me read it again. Come together again so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. In other words, our sexual intimacy is connected to us being able to be self-controlled. There's a part of it that is in our control that we say...
Talking about a different way.
Different way, I can't do it. But wait, this is not playing over there, right? That would be really funny, Joe. You get a bunch more students next week.
Our 3 kids over there are loving that.
We're on the last point on purpose. I'm kind of going faster because when they have small groups all up there. I think it's gonna be funny later. All right, so usually self-control is to refrain from sex, but here he implies be self-controlled enough to have sex with good frequency. He says, do not be apart so long. Don't be self-controlled enough to know that you should not have sex enough. Does that make sense? Or don't take too long to come back together and be physically intimate. Be self-controlled enough to know frequency matters. And it's really important to know this. And sometimes one of the ones cares more about it than the other. But as a couple, we have to figure out, what does this mean to us? And I wish the Bible gave a recipe for it in a way, but it doesn't, which is really better, because it really depends on the couple. And you need to figure out, what is the rhythm that is really healthy for us. And why self-control, by the way? And part of the reason it's self-control is because sex is not just about intercourse. And I want to just unpack this for a second with you. So think about it with us. And this is where it gets holistic in my perspective. And I think this is why Paul is saying this. It requires some physical preparation, right? So you got shower and shave and work out, make the bed, whatever you need to do. Like, there's some physical sides to it that's part of self-control. And some dudes, okay, I'm just gonna say it, like some guys, you're like, you get home and you're sweaty and gross, and maybe your wife stays at home and she cooked and put the kids to bed, and you just watch Netflix, and then she comes up and you want to go somewhere with her in terms of your intimacy, and there's like no sense of preparation. And it's like a total disconnect, because guys are more like, oh, I just want to do this to be intimate. I'm going to serve you because I know you want to be intimate with it. It's not like that. It's really important to understand it requires some physical preparation, and get yourself in a place where it makes sense. Anything you want to add on that one? Okay. It takes emotional preparation. Sometimes this is where maybe women need this one more than men, because you need it more on the front end than we need it off, for us it's more on the back end. But sometimes this means we need to clear things with one another. So you have a fight, or you have something going on, unforgiveness, or you kind of like, in the morning you come home and you never solved it and you wonder why you don't want each other. It's because there's not emotional connectedness. And this is where we talked about forgiveness last time, of like clearing things up and making sure that there's freedom in your relationship, and you've had enough couch time or face-to-face time. Remember this? Like some of the guys, you watched a movie together and you're feeling really close, because guys can get close side to side, but women usually only get close face to face. And so you're feeling really close because you watched a movie and you drank a beer with your wife, and then you're thinking, oh, this is going to lead to great places, and they're not even thinking about it. But you are. But they'll think about it way more if you actually planned a great date for them, and you were romantic with them, and then you had face-to-face with them without being on your phone, and you put the kids to bed even, and you maybe even did the dishes that night, and then you asked her how her day was, and you showed interest in her. All those things will help emotional connectedness. It might lead to great things. Come on in. Great topic. All right. Maybe we should use code words now. So, anything you want to add on that one, babe? The flash was just in here. Sorry.
No, I think that's great.
Okay, and then it takes... Do you agree with me? I've learned this the hard way most of the time. I just want to be honest. Most of the guys have to... Okay, I'll be aware. All right, and then there's a relational component of this, right? That requires self-control. The relational time, we talked about a couple of things. The video you guys watched, let me see if you remember this, okay? There were two things that we said is really good to create in order to build relational intimacy. You create, who remembers this? Privacy? No, but that's a great word. So that's good. We talked about vacations, date nights, all this kind of stuff. So you create moments, and you create, what else? Rhythms, okay? Creating moments, if you remember, there's elevation, pride, connectedness, all those things make a moment. And then rhythm are the things that you do that daily, weekly, seasonally, and all those things help build relational intimacy. When you're relationally intimate and you're connecting a lot more, it leads to emotional intimacy, and it leads to spiritual intimacy, and it leads to physical intimacy. So it's really important for us to be self-controlled enough to have time together, build our friendship. And some of this even is the stuff that I said, like it's the chores, like the stuff that allows you to say, we're in this together. It's not you do this stuff and you know, like I'm gonna clean with you and I'm gonna work and I'm gonna do my part in the relationship. Anything you would add to that?
You're doing a great job.
All right. I think you're just scared of saying it now because we have spies up there. All right. And then the last part of the self-control, okay? There's a spiritual side of this that requires self-control. And it's us being able to have enough discipline to spend time with Jesus, to lead our family spiritually, to pray together. It's really interesting to me how the times that we are most intimate, even in our own marriage, are the times that we're doing the best spiritually. And there's a connectedness between our spiritual intimacy with God and our relational intimacy with one another. And the way it displays itself sexually differs per couple. Some feel really good about a rhythm that's every week or two or whatever, and some it's totally different. And I think you just find what that is for you, but the principle applies that the spiritual journey is really important in this. And I think the closer the spirit is in a marriage, in the center of the home, the more intimacy a couple experiences in all dimensions of their marriage. And it brings it all together. And I highly recommend this. And I think sex is the oneness that is most separate from the people's spiritual life often, because it's connected to guilt growing up. And you gotta fight to figure out how to bring sex back into your spirituality and know God is present when you're intimate. You can sense the power and the presence of Jesus in the middle of that. You don't feel like you have to hide from him, but you actually invite him into the room. And even the longing for that to be a spiritual moment and not just a physical moment. That's what we talk about full sex. It's not like little sex. It's like an experience where God, the Spirit of God, is present. Where the Spirit of God is, there is life. Amen? So invite the Spirit into that. And some of you need to have some heart surgery on this, by the way, and a lot of couples do, where you need to really examine why is it that when it comes to the sexual part of our life, we feel like we can't talk about God, or we can't invite God into it. And do some surgery, figure out, maybe it's because we came into this with guilt, but we're in covenant. Like there's no need for guilt anymore. Take it out, ask and pray over it. Like God, pray before you get intimate and invite him in. And there's such transformation that you can experience in that kind of intimacy when you invite the Spirit of God in and he brings freedom. So, anything else you'd add to that one?
Sure, I'll add. So I think too it's important to realize that magnetic field we talked about. Satan doesn't want you to have sex. And just knowing that, he's going to put distractions and all kinds of things in your way to intentionally throw you off or make you frustrated, make you, whatever it is to get, if he can do it in an easy way, he'll do it in an easy way. But I think it's important as Christians to realize Satan wants the family split. So he's doing his best to keep you apart. And so for me, when I notice that I'm struggling, when I remember that, there's a part of me that rises up and said, you're not going to get me. You're not going to keep me down and try to destroy my home and destroy my marriage. And those are subtle, simple ways that he can do it. If he can keep you from having sex, week after week after week, then that's just one foot in the door, and then he can use the other ones. But it's also one that you can, because it is a physical act, you can measure it. There is a sense that you can rise above your emotions, and you can rise above some of those guilt or whatever it is that you struggle with, to say, no, you're not going to keep me down. You're not going to get to me this way.
Okay, before we talk about some real practical stuff, I want to throw out a couple scenarios that I think are just important to throw out. We talked about not withholding from one another, but I just want to say there are times that you should, because sometimes there's something happening physically with one of you, like after you gave birth. You cannot go on hey, but the scripture says. Slap. Or sometimes you're going through such a turmoil in your marriage that you need to work on other dimensions of your oneness before you go there. But what I would say about that is don't take too long and be wise about it. And I think it can actually help you rebuild intimacy. In other words, if you do it in a way that's serving the other and not just trying to serve you. And then you have to discern that sometimes there's like limitations that people experience. Physically or emotionally in other ways. This is why we put in here, really important to know it's a way to serve the person, not serve your lust. And if you keep this in mind, it's hard to go wrong. This is why the Philippians verse is very important. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. So don't push it for yourself. Push it for your marriage. Like make it about you, because if it's about your marriage, you have to both be in unity about it. And then lastly on that part, I think it's just really healthy to talk about it and to have open conversation. Like there's a part of me that I don't care if the students walk in because of that, because I want them to know that in church people talk about sex, and it's healthy for them and it's healthy for us. And it's if that topic never comes up, it's because there's some kind of guilt that tells you to put it in darkness. Don't put it in the darkness. Talk about it. And even in terms of finding more freedom to figure out, hey, how can we make this better? Hey, when I do that, do you like him more or less? Hey, what was it about this that didn't, like just talk through it and make it really freeing and try things. And I think it's just really good for us to get to that point where you don't feel like this really weird thing about it, because God is present. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom. And so move toward a place where there's freedom in the conversation in your home. All right, question comes up often on this. But what if we're just not aligned? So like you came through all this, and we talked about these 7, 8 things, and like one of you is like, yeah, and the other one's like, no way. What do you do? And I just thought it'd be good to throw out a few things, because sometimes it's just reality. One of the best things you can do is pray. And just take it before God. And I know it sounds really basic, but prayer changes things, and we've seen it change the worst of marriages. Like when people start praying together, it changes. And think people that thought it was over, when they began to pray for their spouse, something began to change in them and in themselves. And pray about it until there's harmony. Talk about it. Try new things. And we have a couple tips for you. A while back, we went through a book called Sex Pyramid. I put a little link there for you. It's by a guy named Ed Young and his wife Lisa. They're pastors in Texas, and really funny people. And if you prefer watching, go to that link I gave you there, and you can watch. There's a 4-part series they did on this, and they're a little bit nuts, to be honest with you. During the series, they like slept on the roof of their church building on a bed and live streamed it for 48 hours or something ridiculous like that. And they like taught from, it was weird.
I don't think they had sex.
No, they didn't do it like that. But it was like on national TV. It was a best-selling book. And it was kind of weird, so I was hesitant about it. But I'll tell you what, the book is phenomenal. Because you think it's all about sex, but it's not. It's all the stuff that we're talking about in the sense of it's holistic. And they just take you through a journey. And they lead you toward what they call the sex spirit, which is like, I think it's 7 days of having sex every day, which you would think is like really easy. It was actually not that easy. We don't need to get into it. All right, fine. I thought it was going to be a piece of cake, and then it wasn't. But there's things that you do to lead up to that week, and you map out a week, but then you build certain things leading up to it that really build your intimacy relationally and emotionally and all this. It's really, really good. And we recommend it. It's a small book. You buy it on Amazon, or you can watch the series, and it gives you some great tips on that as well. Watch it together or separate and then talk about it, and you're going to laugh quite a bit because it's pretty fun. And then a couple more tips for you. Who has the Bible app, the YouVersion app on their device? Several of you. Okay. If you don't, highly recommend it. On the church app that we have, Echo.Church, it's the same. It's built into that, right? So if you click on our notes, it opens YouVersion. But type in Bible on the App Store and look for the one that has the brown little logo or it says YouVersion on it. They have there all these reading plans. And there are some that are awesome in terms of intimacy. So don't type it on Google, okay? Type it in your version. Something like physical intimacy or sexual intimacy. And I read through 2 of them this past week to see if they're good resources, and they were awesome. There's some that are like 7-day reading plans. They're like devotionals that you can do as a couple. And we haven't done it yet, but try it out. It might be, I just think it would be really helpful. So that's a good resource for you. Sometimes you need to go to counseling. I just want to throw this out there because some people feel weird about counseling. Our whole staff has gone through counseling at Echo, so if you feel weird about it, you're in the wrong church. We're all very dysfunctional. And I've gone through counseling personally. She's gone through counseling personally. We've gone through family counseling before, and it's super beneficial. And we've seen it do. Who's been through counseling here before? Several of you. Proud of you guys. It's so good. It's like alignment for your car. Like you don't think you need it till you go, and then like if you stay the course, it just. And even the personal counseling we went through for personal issues of our own lives helped us become healthier in our sexual intimacy with one another. It was not sexual counseling. It was like personal. And because when you feel good about yourself, you feel like you can give yourself to your spouse. And that's what it did to both of us. So highly, highly, highly recommend it. Vacations are really good for this. That's where the rhythm conversation comes in. It's amazing how you just have more sex when you're on vacation. You have to ask yourself why. You're spending time together. You got face-to-face time together. You're building relational intimacy, and it just works. And then sometimes, last one, it's just really good to set a date. And some people hate this, and I used to think it was really weird. Okay. Until I realized as I talked to couples and their like therapists recommended it, and I was like, that sounds like a terrible idea. But it worked for them. So I figured I'll throw it out there. Some couples have to say, we had a couple on our staff years ago, they're not longer in our staff, that this was like the thing they struggle with. They went through counseling for a while on it. And their counselor finally said, hey, you guys set a date that you both agree on. Like every Friday night, we're gonna have sex. And then what you do, and I don't know, I wasn't in their counseling session, so I'm giving you like third-party information here. So maybe our counselor, I don't know if he's here today, should speak into this, but they just said, like, plan it ahead of time, and then plan the things that will make you feel like being intimate. So make sure you go on a date, make sure you clear things up, and the planning will help you build a rhythm that becomes natural. Some couples don't like it, but it actually helped this one couple in our staff years back transform their marriage, pre-planning sex. I don't think that'd fly in our home too well, but if you want to try it out, go for it. Anything else you want to add to that? Okay. Hey, I know this is a weird topic, but any questions randomly, like things that you're wondering about in terms of like the home, parenting, this topic, or things that you've heard before, or just stuff that's kind of random that you feel like we didn't address that you might want to hear perspective on?
We'll talk about the spiritual next week, though. So.
Probably not the best topic to ask for questions out loud. Okay, so we're gonna finish like this, guys. Couple things that I want you to know. Next week, we are in family camp at Mount Hermon. And by the way, I highly recommend this. Mount Hermon Christian Retreat Center is phenomenal, and they are like one of the premier Christian retreat centers in the country, and it's right in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And if you have kids, they have the best family camps. Some people say in the country. People fly from all over the country to go there, and or kids camps. They have student camps there, and then they have family camps. And you take your kids with you. We did it last year. It was phenomenal. They plan stuff for couples. They plan stuff for your kids, and then there's stuff for the family. Or you don't do any of it, and you just send your kids, and you have fun, in the area, and it's awesome. So we're going next week. We do not have this meeting next week, but here's what we want to encourage you to do. Next Wednesday is what we call date night. It's part of our group, okay? So you can't just skip out on it. And that Wednesday night, we'd like to ask you to plan a really fun date night and put some energy and time. And what I'd love for you to do tonight is confirm with one another who's gonna plan it or if you're gonna do it together. Sometimes we rotate some of this. Like sometimes when we do getaways, I'll plan it and surprise her. Sometimes she'll plan it and surprise me, or sometimes we'll plan it together. Same on this. So before you leave tonight, just decide, hey, who's gonna be in charge? Plan something really nice. If you have kids and you're like, I don't know how to get a babysitter, we're gonna break the rules at Echo Church one time. Just don't tell anybody. We're gonna still have childcare here next week. And you're welcome to come, but here's the deal. You gotta go on a date night, like within 2 to 3 miles of where we are, okay? Because if there's an emergency, like our insurance, I probably shouldn't even tell you this, our insurance does not want us to have childcare here if the parents are not in the building. But I think we can break it and say within 2 miles. There's a lot of great restaurants around. So if you wanna drop off your kids, we need to know though. So in the childcare, link I gave you, if you don't have access to it, just email me, say, hey, we're gonna use the childcare, and then we're gonna plan it, and then same time, drop them off at 7 or 6:45 or whatever, and then just don't leave all night, guys, okay? Don't go get a room and like, come back by 8:30, and pick up your children. Or the childcare people will just leave them on with a movie there. But you're welcome to use that so that that's not an excuse to not do it, okay? So make sure you do it. And then I'm gonna send you an email this week with date night ideas. And you're welcome to use that as well. Just like fun things that you can experiment with. And then I wanna give you a rule. And I don't know, I was debating this. I didn't even talk about it with you, babe, sorry. But I wanna ask you to do something you've never done. So not like the typical stuff that you've done before. So go to a place you've never been, or like at least an element you've never done. Remember, part of making moments is you having something new. And just to practice it, like plan something new or do something you've never done. I'll give you an example, okay? Sometimes I'll take my little daughters on dates. And you should do this, dads, by the way. Teach them what a great date is so that when the dude takes them out, it doesn't even compare to what you should do. And they'll just be like, oh, you're not good enough for me. My dad's done better than that. That's my goal. So anyways, for Lily one time, I borrowed my friend's convertible Corvette. And I came to the house with a bouquet of flowers. And I asked her, I said, Lily, all you need to know is you gotta wear a really pretty dress. So she wore a really pretty dress. I came over in front of the house with this blue convertible Corvette, and I went to the door and I rang the doorbell because I wanted her to come out. And she opened the door and I had flowers for her. And then I said, may I take you on a date tonight? And she said, of course, Dad. So she looks at the car, she goes, woo! And then it's like no car seat or booster. As you a little younger, I said, you front seat with me. I mean, there's no choice in the Corvette. So she sat there. I took her to San Pedro Square downtown at the spaghetti factory, whatever place, which she loves. And I had reserved, they have the little train in there? Legit for kids. So I parked out there, opened the door for her, took her out, bought her the menu is yours, Lily. You want dessert? You want 3? You got it. It's all yours. Got her a glass of wine. Just kidding. So, we went on a walk afterwards together. We're back in the car, drove her in the convertible through the night. It was awesome. And I know in her mind, it's a moment. You ask my daughter, tell me your moments in life. It's a moment. Why? Elevation, something new. Ooh, connectedness. We were connecting with each other. There's a moment of pride. Man, my dad figured out how to get a convertible Corvette, and I get to do this. My friends have never done this. Moment of pride for her. There's a moment of insight where that night I spoke into her life, and I talked to her about who she is and how special she is and how people ought to treat girls like her. And it's a moment of these things create moments, speak into each other's life. So think creatively, how are you gonna do this, and just have a blast that night together. Sound good? Yeah. All right, before we close, I believe there's something we ought to do together, and it is sing happy birthday to Sherman. Because they are celebrating. Sherman is, I think, 37 years old today. And he's been married 43 years. So, pretty amazing. I am not a musician, but I'm going to kick it off. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Cha-cha-cha. right, guys, we're going to close our time in prayer. What I'd love for you to do before you leave, though, and two things is even in meeting somebody around you, I know we don't do this very often in this group because it's more of a workshop style, but love it if you can share, though, before you go, one of your favorite date nights that you've had or that you've heard of people having, or maybe you've seen it with one another, just to give ideas, okay? So, like, if you've gone on a date night, you might not want to share a date night that somebody else took you on, because that'd be weird. Like, making your spouse, not like, when I was dating this one guy, back when I had someone romantic in my life. Anyways, so if you don't have one, it's okay, but a fun experience, an element of a date night, something that was like, hey, this is a good idea that I've heard of before. Share it with somebody around you real quick, just a spark of an idea, and then before you leave, figure out who's going to plan next week. Sound good?
Yeah.
All right. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for fun subject together. Thank you for the freedom even, Lord, to talk about intimacy with one another. Thank you that you are the one who created sex and you created it for the pleasure of our lives. Help us to live in that pleasure, to cultivate the type of love and lifestyle that lead to this kind of intimacy. Help us with this commitment, Lord, to live a life in such a way that our hearts are clear, that our guilt is not inside of us, there's freedom. There's a spirit-led component to who we are. And God, that you are present in our intimacy, our oneness as a couple, so that we would be able to have frequency in our physical oneness. Would you bless these couples as they plan their date nights? Would you bless them as they build their intimacy? And help us to be an example to future generations and even other people in our church and our friendship circles, God, of what marriages ought to look like in couples that love you and serve you. In Jesus' name.